Ah! Excuse me, can I have my phone back? It dropped in your, thing.
Are you tuned enough?
What?
Are you tuned enough? 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 Are you tuned enough?
Hi, my name is Bob, and today I want to talk about Toontown. So if you were an early 2000s kid like me watching the Disney Channel or something, odds are you maybe saw these Toontown commercials when you were younger and maybe had no idea what they were about. In fact, I've always wondered why these commercials were so confusing. It always starts with a cold open of one of the cogs doing something totally normal, like playing baseball or playing the piano. You then assume from context that these are the bad guys, because then they hit them with pies or play it safe. And then of course at the end of every single commercial, they ask without fail, are you tuned enough? To this day, I still have no idea what that means. It makes you wonder, how does one be tuned enough? I guess it's one of life's unanswered questions. The commercials in the UK were even weirder. Kinda scary actually, I'll probably have nightmares about it. Like if I had to choose, I would definitely take cheesy costumes over this any day. I'm glad they stayed in the UK. But seriously though, it's interesting that the majority of people who played Toontown in the early 2000s were either recommended it by a friend or they saw these commercials and checked it out themselves. So say what you will about them, but apparently they were pretty effective. Let me know which one you were, because I was definitely the latter. I mean, after seeing these commercials a few dozen times, I finally decided to check it out and see what it's all about. And I actually kinda liked it. So much so that when it shut down, well, I wasn't happy about it. Bring him back. I'm sorry, what? I want my Melvin back!
Put the gun down!
All down the drain. It was 8 years ago! You have to let go! Okay, actually that skit wasn't entirely accurate. I mean, yeah, my toon's name actually was Melvin, for reasons I'll never understand. Really, I don't even know why. It's not even close. I mean, the day I found out it was closing down for good, I wasn't super angry or freaking out, nor did I hold a man at gunpoint. I was actually just left feeling kinda sad. Toontown was kinda like a friend that was always there. Years could go by, and I could always pull up my old account like nothing changed. It was a game you could always fall back on. A game that's unapologetically silly, somewhat challenging at times. That had a solid community of players you could always meet and make friends with any time of the day. Something about it kept bringing me back every time. And a lot of people I've talked to lately share the same sentiment about this game having a positive impact in their lives one way or another. It was a wholesome way to spend the occasional Sunday afternoon. But then of course it was August of 2013. The iPhone 5 had just come out. I opened up the Toontown website on my iPhone 3. And one morning an announcement was released that all of its servers would officially be shutting down September 19th of that same year. The statement made clear that all players would have full access to the game's features usually behind a paywall. Anyone with a paid membership would be refunded. It was a fun few weeks. I rarely had a membership for this game, so it was kinda cool, but not to sound too dramatic, but the looming feeling that it was all gonna be gone soon was hard to forget. The statement itself was of course pretty vague. They said they were shifting their development focus to other online and mobile game experiences. I'll talk about that part later in the video. But basically the day it shut down, Toontown servers reached peak server capacity, with everyone around the world spending their afternoon playing it one last time. Thousands of people signed a petition hoping to get Disney to change their mind, myself included. I remember signing that shit, but it didn't change the fact that it shut down. And I don't know, seeing that announcement brought back memories of a simpler time, and the fact that it started a trend of multiple other childhood games closing down shortly after was kind of depressing as time went on. 3 of them were on the exact same day. Toontown, Pixie Hollow, and Pirates of the Caribbean Online were some of the first victims of massive layoffs and purges over the next decade. Not to mention just a few years later, the same thing happens with Club Penguin, a game that despite garnering more attention than all 3 of these games combined, also shut down just 4 years later. And I'll be honest, I wanted to make this video because it took me a few years to realize that Toontown actually sort of meant a lot to me, and I didn't realize how much I appreciated it being there until it was gone. It kinda sucked, and I never really bothered to look into it much. So I want to talk about the underdog of MMORPGs, pun not intended. A game that was one of the first of its kind in a sea of early 2000s role-playing games. A game that maybe didn't get the attention it deserved. And most importantly, I want to find out why it ended, and what it meant for the future of Toontown years down the line. I what is Toontown? Toontown Online officially launched on June 2nd, 2003. It's basically an online game about a cartoon animal world where you make your own toon and play with other people from around the world. It's loosely based off of the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit. After an open beta in 2002, Toontown was open to the public just a year later. Following its recent anniversary, Toontown is now 19 years old. 2 more years and Blippi can legally drink. Quick side note, by the way, I want to give a special thanks to my buddy PurpulPancakes for helping me find the Toontown Anniversary Archive. It came out June of this year and has a bunch of cool stuff. Link below if you want to check it out. But anyway, Toontown is a game heavily focused on teamwork, with the seemingly never-ending goal of working together to stop the cogs from taking over Toontown, turning all the fun, colorful buildings around town into gray, boring corporate husks of what they once were. Also, it's very goofy and slapstick. You hit the bad guys with pies and squirt guns. The gags, of course, being inspired by the Looney Tunes aesthetic of fighting people with crazy over-the-top cartoon weapons. Also, jelly beans. Jelly beans! When the game officially launched, it worked pretty well. It quickly grew to have a fan base that was pretty passionate and dedicated about it. People would go out of their way to buy CD-ROMs of the game back in 2004. Not to mention, Toontown's had its fair share of conventions and fan sites that were created not even months after the beta came out. And it all started with an idea that went through a number of changes, speed bumps, roadblocks, and uphill battles in its early creation. So I wanted to talk a bit about its history, because it's honestly pretty funny how it all came about. Development for this game was kind of a roller coaster.
Disney's Magic Kingdom, Disneyland, USA.
By that I mean Toontown was created by Disney's virtual reality studio. No, not that kind of VR, but rather it was a division of Disney made in 1992, responsible for research and development of the VR elements of theme park rides at Disneyland. VR in the early 90s was obviously nothing like it is today, and I can imagine 20 years from now I'll be saying that again. But anyway, one of their biggest VR projects in the early 90s was headed by Schell to help create an interactive in-house online game called Toontag, an exhibit of Disneyland's internet zone, where you could play tag with popular Disney characters online. Before they did this project, their focus was more so experiences and rides, but this was different, and they realized the creative potential of Toontag seemed like a good way to get their foot in the door, at least in the gaming part of it all. Not to mention that it was a very successful exhibit at Disneyland. The major success of this exhibit, along with some negotiating, eventually gave them the green light and $5 million to start early development of an online game using a software called Panda 3D. A bit ironic they never made a panda species, because animals. So basically, Toontag was the vehicle that made Toontown a reality. They eventually came up with an idea, a massively multiplayer online role-playing game that would be sort of like a virtual theme park of sorts, because, well, a lot of the people who made this game were former Imagineers at Disneyland, with a lot of the inspiration coming from actual attractions at Disneyland, like fishing, golf, mini games, or looking for the biggest cog in town and punching him in the face. You'd also see popular Disney characters just kind of wandering around, like Mickey Mouse or Duck. It's a little cheesy, I know, but their goal from the very beginning is one I kind of respect, to make a game that gave a sense of escapism, a world that was vastly different from our own. It was a pretty ambitious project, one that would eventually be competing with a bunch of other games that would come out the same year. It was definitely going to be a bit of a challenge. It wasn't smooth sailing at first. Toontown would actually be their third or maybe fourth attempt at making an MMORPG game, after plans to make both a Hercules game and an Atlantis game were scrapped entirely back in 1996. It didn't take much for a game to be cancelled. It's really no secret that Disney is very protective of their family-friendly brand, so that was their first big problem. Safety. They would get letters from Disney worried about kids talking to strangers on the internet. Something like,
No kid will be harassed, even if they don't know they're being harassed.
they were really concerned about cyberbullying, stalking, or anything that would paint the company in a negative light. So they spent years working on a safe chat that would make Disney happy. It went through a lot of trial and error. Keep in mind that back in 1996, there was no blueprint for how to make a chat system for an MMORPG. The early experiments would basically be a pop-down interface that let you construct messages that have mostly harmless words and phrases. They thought it would be harmless until they gave it to a 14-year-old boy who wrote the following sentence literally 5 minutes after they gave it to them.
I want to stick my long-necked giraffe up your fluffy white bunny.
So, not good. Eventually they created Speed Chat, an integrated safety chat feature that would later be added to dozens of games in the future. Toontown later proved to be a major influence in shaping the futures of tons of post-2000s child MMO games. Problem solved. Disney was happy. For like 2 seconds. So of course they got another letter from Disney. It was another complaint about one of the core mechanics of the game, but this time it got a little personal. So basically the main premise of Toontown, right, is that the bad guys are corporate robots called cogs that were taking over Toontown. But fun fact about this, they were just gonna be regular, real people in business suits. But apparently the son of a senior executive at Disney found this concept really disrespectful to the company and its businessmen. This was the vice president of the VR department, who literally told them to either remove the suits or the game game would be cancelled entirely, meaning they pretty much had to change the main enemy of the game mid-development because of an insecure junior executive at Disney. No offense. Come on. So instead of calling them suits, they called them cogs. Luckily, they were okay with it. It's a bit ironic though that dehumanizing the very thing they're supposedly criticizing is somehow better than making them regular businessmen, but hey, it worked. In fact, this last minute decision actually led to a lot more flexibility and creative potential than they realized. They then created a wide variety of different cogs you can fight against, each of them residing in one of 4 departments: legal, sales, finance, and management. They also have clever little names poking fun at a lot of the biggest tropes in business. Names like penny pincher, cold caller, backstabber, name dropper, two-face. The creator himself even said his favorite is the micromanager. And, you know, the older I get, the more it seems like a pretty ironic depiction of corporate Disney slowly taking over the world, but that's besides the point. This maybe wasn't intentional, but something about a corporate monopolistic takeover of every building in town feels weirdly familiar nowadays. But anyway, Toontown became a prime example of how to make an online game that was both safe, fun, and had long-term replayability with daily short-term tasks. It won lots of awards, and it grew to be a pretty well-respected game for its time. Even nowadays, it has a pretty tight-knit community of players who contribute to the game on a daily basis. Toontown was even confirmed to have somewhere around 15 million players back in 2006. That was a pretty big deal. I couldn't find the exact figures because apparently it's confidential information, but it was pretty clear that Toontown Online had a pretty large player base at the time. However, Toontown and many games similar would start to have some serious competition. They'd also start to have even more forks in the road as time went on. Why did it close? Toontown Online always had and continues to have a pretty dedicated fan base, so at the time, people were pretty upset to find out it was shutting down. One reason for that was because of a tiny little footnote in the official statement that was actually removed in post because of the backlash it got. That little footnote was, of course, about Club Penguin. Toontown shut down for more than a few reasons, but this was the one people talked about the most, because while Toontown was pretty successful in its early release, times changed. When Disney acquired Club Penguin in 2007, the decade ahead would prove the future of Disney MMO games would never be the same again. In fact, that future would inevitably be non-existent. It seemed like a no-brainer for Disney to acquire a game that at the time was massively successful. For example, compared to Toontown's 15 million players back in 2006, Club Penguin had 100 million. By late 2006, it already had hundreds of employees. In fact, Disney bought Club Penguin for $700 million just 3 days before Toonfest 2007 in Orlando, Florida. Their investment in Club Penguin, of course, proved to be incredibly profitable. Despite that though, Toontown was still doing pretty well for itself. But if you were comparing the two games back in 2013, sadly it was pretty clear which one was the more dominant game. Google Analytics, for example, proves that during Toontown's absolute peaks and Club Penguin's biggest lows, Club Penguin was still searched more often, played more often, and made more money. From a business standpoint, it makes sense. Toontown Online's subscription-based model was proving to be no longer sustainable, especially in 2013. I can understand people being mad at Disney for shifting their priorities on a game that was inevitably doomed to the same fate. It's like it didn't even matter in the end. Tried so hard, I got so far. But keep in mind, there were definitely other factors to consider as well. It wasn't just the games getting this treatment, but rather it was a result of over a decade of reshifting and combining divisions within Disney that ultimately led to layoffs and constant last-minute decisions and shutdowns from 2007 to 2013. So at the end of the day, decisions like these were a major factor to the point where Disney pretty much gave up on licensing games themselves entirely and instead put it all in the hands of third-party companies. Not to mention how last-minute the news was always delivered to the staff. So that leads me to my next point. Toontown was also just one of many victims of poor communication and constantly keeping up with Disney's demands and expectations. So of course, Toontown's demise wasn't just the result of a more popular game, but Toontown was also just not put in the best position to succeed. I did some research and I realized that a big problem Toontown also had to deal with was the constant pressure of financial success. Toontown was constantly overbilled by an internal team at Disney to keep their servers running. Many even knew a few years beforehand that the moment Toontown stopped making money, it would be closed down for good. It almost seemed like an inevitability, as they were basically paying completely unnecessary fees just to keep Disney happy with its profit stream. It makes you wonder how much of it was out of pocket, but at the same time, Toontown was a fairly profitable game in the first couple years of its release. But eventually, Toontown had to keep up with the times. It's no secret that Toontown had to deal with a gigantic Disney conglomerate. In fact, you can compare them a lot to the cogs. They have the prime focus of making the most money possible, seizing assets, and growing their empire. But you expect that from Disney, and you expect that from the cogs. Just think about how big those petitions were for Club Penguin, and even then, it didn't change much. However, while it's easy to say that Disney was the sole reason for its shutdown, Truthfully, it wasn't. Toontown eventually reached a point where, like it or not, the future was pretty uncertain. Toontown's entire business model was around its paid services. You had to pay around $10 a month to play the game to its fullest. Back in 2003 or even 2005, it was effective. That is until the market started changing in a pretty drastic way. It would lead Disney and Toontown staff to realize that their subscription-based model wasn't as sustainable as it used to be. In 2013, Jesse Schell noted that one of the big reasons for Toontown's closure was because of an upward trend of mobile gaming on smartphones and iPads. Lots of people on the smartphone. And because of this, as time went on, video games as we know it changed forever. Whether that's for better or worse is subjective, but it's hard to deny that mobile games and the smartphones they're played on dominate the global markets more than ever thought possible. And Toontown as it was in its current state just couldn't compete with the increasingly competitive demographic of young audiences playing MMO games a little differently than they used to. Not to mention the past few years, platforms like Disney Plus have proven to be much better and more successful than playing a single game for $10 a month. You can even think about Xbox Live, PlayStation Plus, or hell, even Nintendo Online. Provide one monthly fee to play hundreds of online games. Like seriously, heading into the next decade, how willing are you to pay $10 a month to play a single game without limited access? How more likely are you to just play a Roblox game for free? Sure, maybe you are paying for Builders Club or whatever it's called now, I don't really care, but when you think about it, you're really just paying for extra stuff you could live without. Toontown Online without a membership back in 2010 did actually feel kinda limited. More gags, accessories, gardening, and limited access to certain features only in certain parts of the game's map. You kinda had to stay in Toontown Central if you wanted to do anything. Even if you do have a game subscription, odds are it's not often and the prices are lower. The market has realized that the real currency is attention. For example, mobile game ads. Gaming subscription services aside, Steam and PC games are totally free to play online. How do you get people to stay when your entire game is built off of a business model that's steadily decreasing in interest, especially heading into 2021 and beyond? At some point, eventually, as a player or a developer, you have to be honest with yourself and really think about what the future of this game would have looked like if it didn't shut down. So I know I'm starting to sound a little doom and gloom right now, but something I came to really respect about Jesse Schell while researching this video is that he's very optimistic. I mean, even the title of his TED Talk on YouTube is literally called "The Future is Beautiful." In my opinion, his optimism is infectious, because after watching some of his interviews and reading his posts, I'm even starting to believe that maybe one day Toontown could come back.
Is it coming back? Is it?
Is it?
Is it?
Is it? It's already back.
Well, you got Toontown Rewritten is
yeah,
back.
that's true. It's original Toontown.
But is like a Disney-sponsored Toontown, is that going to come back? I think it will. I continue to believe that it will.
But at the same time, he's also very practical and realistic in the way he talks about Toontown. And he said that if Toontown were ever to come back, a few things would have to be made clear. First of all, he said that a Disney-sponsored Toontown would only come back if Disney sees a monetary incentive and a large enough fan base to bring it back. Somewhere around 20 million units sold is when the conversation is worth having. And also if they just like the idea enough to fund it. At the moment, it seems pretty uncertain. A potential solution to this was debated back in 2013, that if Toontown does officially come back, they said it could be on a different platform entirely, much like Club Penguin Island experimented with moving the smartphones and eventually made it playable to PC. The reason they did this was because, well, much like Club Penguin in 2017, Toontown Online was admitted to be structurally pretty old and outdated by 2013. Not to mention post-2010, Toontown servers were getting hacked and DDoSed like all the time. Their security measures were on par to 2003 and it just wasn't working anymore. It was working on really old code, and this was an idea they seriously considered and debated. Sadly though, you might remember Island only lasted like 2 years. It makes you wonder that if Island succeeded, maybe Toontown would have gotten a similar revamp. Because apparently back in 2010, there actually was a prototype for a Toontown 2.0. It was a fully functional tech demo that actually had a lot of potential. Fluid animations, clothing, minigames, fully functional gameplay, and free to play. Sadly though, the concept was scrapped back in 2011. Why did this happen exactly? I don't know. Rumors say it's because of layoffs, reshifting. It's also very possible Disney just didn't want to invest the time, energy, and money in a project that they felt was going to steadily decline just like the original game. Honestly, who knows? Didn't really help that Island was technically a failed experiment, so that makes the chances even less likely, but not impossible. Many would argue Toontown is already back, but I have to ask, what's the future for this game look like when it's completely paid out of pocket by the community? What do I think? Well, first of all, I do think the blame at Disney is a bit justified for sure. The people inside of a company may very well be great people, but those higher up executive decisions often think very little of people's feelings. Still though, I did learn something recently that made me rethink Disney's priorities for the future of Toontown. Toontown shut down 8 years ago. It doesn't feel that long, but it is. And apparently even after all these years, every single person who played it since 2002 may still be able to access their account again one day. I found it hard to believe, but it seems like not only does Disney still have ownership of the intellectual property of Toontown, but somewhere deep in the vaults of Disney headquarters is a database of every single toon. This kind of blew my mind a little bit. I just assumed they were all gone, but Club Penguin, on the other hand, I still have no idea. One day I might be Melvin again. Sources also say that as recent as 2016, Disney has been having internal meetings to discuss the potential future of Toontown. So sure, you could definitely make the comparison that Disney is a lot like the Cogs. But I could also argue that this wasn't necessarily a sad decision in the end, because since 2013, a variety of new community-owned servers have come out, Toontown Rewritten and Corporate Clash being the two most talked about. It makes you wonder if in the long term, maybe closing down Toontown Online actually helped revive the game when it most needed it. That's not to say Toontown has the biggest fan base right now. It might not even have half the attention Club Penguin does. But for a game nearing a decade of radio silence, the fans that stuck around are still just as eager and active as before. The community has had nearly a decade to rebuild and recreate the game the way they want it to be. Not to mention, Toontown Rewritten is completely free. You don't even need a membership. It's active and sustainable. They may not have Disney's approval, but people are happy with it. So I don't know. It's nice to see a community I used to be a part of still have hope despite its setbacks. Because to be honest, I've been watching the Toontown community from the sidelines ever since it shut down 8 years ago. Because I hate to say this, but there were times I was kind of worried this game might be on life support. Like fan servers not getting updated as much, servers were getting hacked, huge messes were happening behind the scenes, longtime members were leaving, and others simply losing interest. However, despite that, one thing I came to respect and realize about this community is that while it may not be the biggest, even if I wasn't playing it every day, it's definitely one of the most dedicated and committed fan bases I've seen. Especially recently, seeing it kind of make a comeback. People are starting to get nostalgic for it, they're playing it again, making videos about it. It gives me a little bit of hope for the future, because a community like this is one that perseveres despite all odds. With fan servers being paid for completely out of pocket by caring fans, and a community that constantly aspires to make fan art, videos, servers, streams, and friendships, all revolving around a game that even nearly a decade after its original closure is still alive and well because of the people who play it, talk about it, and make stuff for it. Former staff even go out of their way to do interviews, answering questions, and keeping the community updated about the future. Of course though, since then, a lot of the staff have moved on to pursue other projects, with Schell Games still being active today since its creation back in 2002. Funny thing too is that 20 years after the creation of Toontown in the VR department, Jesse Schell would later go on to work on actual VR games. Circle of life. Hell, people are even discovering Toontown for the first time, quickly realizing that this game has a lot of history and that the people on it are pretty friendly and inviting. Maybe it's not nearly as big as it was in 2006, but a lot of the people who played it are still here. I mean, playing Rewritten again myself, I had a pretty good time. People were helping me out with my tasks, showing me their homes, and it reminded me of when I was a kid. I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty shy growing up, but as cheesy as it probably sounds, it was nice to go into a game like Toontown and through an online game where I played a blue dog in a polo shirt named Melvin. Those small acts of kindness and friendship, things like that were what made this game so wholesome and inviting. And I cherish games like that, which have the ability to connect people who share a common goal. Even if that goal was admittedly kind of silly, it didn't really matter. And I'm not gonna lie, 2020 was a pretty tough year for a lot of us. That year reminded me a lot of those rainy days where I was stuck inside when I was a kid. Or maybe even the summertime when you were stuck inside and you just moved and there's literally nothing to do. So what would you do? You'd watch movies, TV shows, reruns, and then play games like this, where you could meet people and play mini games and stuff. This footage you're seeing right now is a guy I never met. I'm not even sure I'll ever see him again, but he was really nice and friendly. He showed me his house and everything. And I don't know, it's little things like that that I really appreciate. And in my eyes, that just proves that Toontown is a formula that still works, that always works. A formula that became an influence to so many other games.
Toontown back then, like kids that age now are playing those games in spaces. So in a lot of ways, I do feel like we're way ahead of our time because those kind of games are becoming so normal. The main thing that's really changed is fundamentally the business model.
That also means Toontown is always going to be part of the collective consciousness of the internet, and it's definitely going to leave a sizable mark in the memories of a lot of people. Even if you've never played it yourself, you've probably seen or heard of it more than a few times. Regardless, it's always going to be a part of internet history, and it'll always have dedicated fans that are playing and talking about it. And I think that's nice, because sometimes when we look back at the past or even stop to appreciate the present, everything we experience has an effect on us, good and bad. The things we grow up with and the things we love in the here and now are what make us who we are. And Toontown was just a little blip in my life, a little piece of my childhood that I grew to love even more looking back on it decades later. It burrowed a place in my brain in exactly the way it was intended. It gave me that sense of escapism when times were tough. Such a simplistic, goofy concept. A game that even was maybe a bit of a grind sometimes. Maybe you get bored of it after a while, but I'm still glad I experienced it. I'm glad I played it again. And I guess it's the little things. A few weeks before Toontown officially shut down, Jesse Schell put out one final letter to the community. He talked about his Red Rabbit, JMO, the account he's had for the last 15 years. He also mentioned getting a ton of emails from Toontown fans and said that he himself was super sad about Disney's decision to shut down Toontown. He said it was a big part of his life since 1998, and to see it close is extremely depressing when it means so much to so many people. But he still said you shouldn't give up. He made the comparison of Star Trek being cancelled after just 3 years of being on the air, and then after 10 years, it came back because the fans loved it so much, they had conventions, they wrote fan fiction, and did everything they could to keep the show alive. He gave some advice about keeping the Toon spirit going, contacting Disney, staging events, getting people's attention to show the world how much you care about Toontown. I never saw this letter until recently, but I can imagine seeing this myself when I was younger and maybe being inspired by it, or at least a little comforted by the fact that the creators themselves still have hope that it could come back. And not just that, but making it very clear that even after 19 years, he's never forgotten about it. And if I'll be honest, I'll probably never forget about it either.
Like fighting the cogs, it's very possible this won't be a short-term battle, but a long-term war, one that will test your patience. But if you are patient, and you keep showing the world how much you care about being part of a game like this, Toontown may be able to rise again. In the meantime, keep your Toon alive inside your heart. No one can shut that down.
So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say for this video. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked it, and as always, good vibes, everyone. Hi, thanks again for watching. So a few quick things. First of all, I'm working on another video right now that should hopefully be ready to record soon. If you want to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe or check out my other stuff. Up to you. I appreciate you being here either way. Also, quick shout out to MeaLynk for posting a picture of the merch he recently got. It's honestly pretty funny, but don't worry, I'm adding transparent and smaller versions of the sticker, so check out the link below if you want one. If you get one yourself, send it to me on Twitter at Pengicitis1. I'll mention you in the next video. And of course, feel free to check out my Patreon if you're interested. I'm gonna post some behind the scenes stuff about this video and future ones. Again, thank you for sticking around. Have a good day or night, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!